Greens, and I want to appreciate everybody for making it here tonight on what is considered to be short notice, but really appreciate your cooperation and your presence. Certainly, your comments are welcome and your questions as well. There will be a spot at the end for that. We're going to have a few people who are going to present from this PowerPoint that we've got displayed here. And just so grateful for everybody who's been involved. So I don't forget, I want to say this at the beginning. So we're going after this grant. For us, it's going to be about a $23 million grant. You'll see that later on in the PowerPoint. But I want to thank Nicole, Hannah, Randy, Nick, Merchant McIntyre, who are not here, but for all of the work, because we identified this grant Nicole saw it, Merchant McIntyre brought it to us as well, and we knew it was going to be a very tight deadline, so we appreciate everybody who's had a part, even those we asked for letters of support. So this is the RAISE grant, and as you can see on this opening slide, RAISE is an acronym that stands for Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity. And really the Biden administration are focusing on the sustainability and equity piece with this particular grant. And what we're tagging it, what we're calling our grant, the title of it is Natchitoches Safe Streets Revitalization Project. This is the first of two public hearings that we're planning. I just have a few slides to go over. Like I said earlier, we have some others. Just kind of give you a little background. This is a $1 billion multimodal, which means different modes of transportation. You have shipping, you have air, you have, of course, vehicles. And this is a competitive discretionary grant program for to transportation infrastructure. Typically, you think of your bridges, your roads, your sidewalks. Previously, known as Tiger, that's the older name, but more recently, it was known as BUILD, all right? It prioritizes national infrastructure improvements that have local or regional impact. And we'll get into what this project, what we're proposing, what we saw as a noble project for this, for our submission. It encourages partnership with local agencies, some are here tonight, including water and utility infrastructure, as well as public and private partnerships. $500 million, will be awarded to areas, projects located in rural areas, and we are considered to be rural. In fact, you may see this later on or not, but under the guidance that we've got, even Alexandria will be considered to be rural, because I think it's 200,000 or fewer people. Up to $30 million allocated for eligible planning and $10 million for areas of persistent poverty, covers pre-construction. So you can move on to the next, those some details. This next slide kind of gives us some guidelines. Federal cost share up to 100% if you are a rural area. And again, we qualify also in that next category, that next bullet point, which is an area of persistent poverty. So we would qualify for both. Minimum awards, and it has it there, $1 million for the planning in the rural, no, $1 million project, that's the minimum one, I'm sorry, and no minimum for planning grants, and up to $25 million. As I mentioned earlier, you'll see again, our last estimate was 23, so we fit in that. And then $100 million per state, so I guess they just want to let us know that no state is going to get above $100 million, right? And what I've seen, they haven't really even come close to that. So, but the next slide, this is slide number 4, Safe Streets Revitalization Project. With funding support from the federal DOT, the city will launch the Natchitoches Safe Streets Revitalization Project to rehabilitate and revitalize the Texas Street Business Corridor as well as feeder roads and neighborhood streets that enable the safe movement of people and goods, providing equitable access to essential services for all Natchitoches residents. And just some more details, the project elements include rehabilitation of roads and drainage facilities, new pavement, new and widened sidewalks, walking paths, marked bike and pedestrian lanes, and other amenities, and also ADA compliance as well. And then the last slide that I'll be covering before I pass it off to, I believe, Randy. Is that right? Yeah, Randy. The project scope includes the development of the Texas Street Business Corridor Roundabout at Dixie in Texas, the Natchitoches Bike and Pedestrian Plan, which totals itself about $9 million, a little bit over. It was improved in 2018 in or during the previous administration. That plan was approved, and again, it's expensive, so we're looking for this grant to help us do it. And the rehabilitation of more than 30 additional streets in districts 3 and 4 that were not included originally in the bike and pedestrian plan. Most importantly, the project aligns with the federal DOT's prioritization of projects that have a significant local or regional impact, result in good paying jobs, improve safety, and address access, racial equity, and environmental concerns, which again are the objectives of this particular grant this time around. Mr. Randy.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to ad-lib just slightly in that what sort of brings us in a way to where we are after we finally were over Hurricane Laura, and the first time I sat down with the mayor, and he says, I want to concentrate on doing some things on the west side of the town. Obviously, the Bailey Heights, Breedatown areas are blighted to a huge degree, and it's difficult to go out into that neighborhood and tackle that first if we don't tackle the inherent thing you see when you pass through. So at day one, we started discussing how do I do rehab of the Texas Street Business Corridor. It was the original business sector of the town. There was no East Natchitoches through the 40s and 50s into the 60s. Some of that started developing in the 60s. So generally, that became sort of the base concept for how you look at where you go next. This first slide is something that is specifically addressing the proposed roundabout at Texas and Dixie Street, which would make everything certainly more efficient, safer traffic flow, and it's a very busy thoroughfare. The state of Louisiana took that light down about 5 or 6 years ago, and even I avoid the intersection because I can't ever get out. I'll sit there and wait for 5 or 6 cars to leave. So what this concept would be obviously to widen it, to put the roundabout in, and this is a very preliminary plan of the roundabout. And then you would have the sidewalks added, and you would incorporate the bike lanes, which came forth in the bike and pedestrian master plan that we did in 2018. And as part of that, the concept upgrades your street lighting, whether again, we're pre-designed, so the early stages may be that a major corridor like Texas is something that gets lighting like out at University going to the interstate. You wouldn't have as close of spacing, but you would have higher lighting, and you're lighting and illuminating that for the pedestrians and the bicycles as well as the vehicles. So that renders just an early concept of what it would be. It would be a single lane roundabout. And before I go to the next slide, I will add that the legislative session is currently underway. I spoke to Senator Bernard yesterday, and we're optimistic when the session ends tomorrow, we will have had approved a capital outlay application that the city submitted for the roundabout project, and preliminary it's $585,000 that we would have in priority 5, and it would become cash in the following fiscal year. So that means we would have funds in hand in the middle of 2022 to actually start something like this. So that was very exciting news. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that it doesn't change. Going on to the next slide, even though we had the bike master plan early on, we had to look and depict what streets, where are we talking about? And Nick Barrett, who's a traffic expert, is telling us what priorities, what streets, where you have the arterial streets, the collector streets, and the local streets. So we took this entire area, which is bounded generally on the north by really Texas Street and maybe the collectors to the north side of Texas, bounded over on the west side by the bypass, LA Highway 1 bypass in the lake, bounded south generally by University, and bounded over on the east side, the general downtown area, primarily starting with 2nd Street because it's part of the bike master plan layout, but it really does include Washington where all of that ties together. So that sort of looks at the total picture. It's on a Google aerial map, which if someone were looking for their individual home, they could probably much more easily look at this, put their finger, say, I live right here, this is how it will affect me. And they're color coded, as you can see, in the green, the yellow, and the light teal blue. So that's sort of the beginning basis. Now that thing could morph 2 or 3 times before we finish the application, but this is the starting point. Going to the next slide is really just a close-up as you try to depict maybe how these locations work. You will note that all of your schools are tied together basically in the concept, whether you're using Dean Street or whether you're using Dorothy off of Texas, or if you were coming in the bypass on Dean to go to the school. But the concepts are pulls, all your schools, all the schools at the end of Wells Street, which would be obviously on the north side of Texas. So generally, the concept expands these. One would be street improvements of whatever sort Nick depicts, but it would also include the sidewalk addition. The bike lane markings are shared bike lane, depending on how it would work, and lighting. And your upgrades of lighting out in these residential areas might be more likened to something like we put in Park Natchitoches, a lower light, but typically always LED. If you go to the next slide, there's over 30 streets listed on that page, and each of the street segments is earmarking where we would target doing repair and improved work. And I'll let Nick go into more detail as he's talking about that, but that sort of gives you a feel as you look down the list, and you will note with what Rebecca will tell you, it keys off of the 2018 Bike Master Plan. So if you were to stack these one on top of the other, you will start noting very common goals as to why these streets are picked. Not only are they the main arterial or the collectors, but they also are where the Bike Master Plan depicted that you would have to do your layout for bike lanes and where you need to improve all your pedestrian stuff. That's my share of what I was going to discuss. Ms. Rebecca is going to take the next one.
Thank you, Randy. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rebecca Blankenbaker, and I'm the Executive Director of Cane River National Heritage Area. I had the pleasure of serving as the co-chair of the steering committee for the Bike and Pedestrian Master Plan in 2018. And it was a study and a program undertaken by the city of Natchitoches to build connectivity in the city. It's one of our biggest challenges in Natchitoches is building connectivity between the west side and the east side to major facilities like the hospital and retail and schools. So this member committee was made up of 15 stakeholders in the community, members, partners, organizations who partner with the city on a regular basis, and community members. We engaged with the Rapides Area Planning Commission to conduct this study. They did a considerable amount of research based off of crash data involving pedestrians and bicyclists and other heat map data on how people are getting across and getting around town. And it also included 2 community surveys that not only included opinions from visitors, but residents and students of both LSMSA and Northwestern, because they are a critical component of our population. It also included 4 community listening sessions so that we can get feedback from the community, but then also present the priorities in the plan. So what was a result of that? You can go to the next slide. Thank you. A result of that included a mixed plan that included both priorities for pedestrian paths and bicycle paths. Those included, for pedestrians, it included specific paths for how pedestrians should navigate the city, but also critical needs for pelican crossings, which are those crosswalks, those lighted and buttoned crosswalks, for shared road signs. For bike paths and bicyclists, it also includes shared and marked lanes, paved shoulders, and specific bike lanes created. Now, we knew that this was not going to be able to be tackled overnight. This is a considerable investment by the city, but this is the ground rules, and this is sort of the starting point for us as a city as we are improving our infrastructure, that we incorporate these complete street recommendations through the bike and pedestrian plan. And it's critical because you'll see in the next slide that over 50% of our households in Natchitoches Parish are 0 vehicle or 1 vehicle households. That's a significant number. And this project, this grant application, helps take the first big step in improving access and equity of transportation and mobility in this community. The next slide, as Randy mentioned, the sidewalk improvements and some of the streets that are listed as improvements in this grant application follow the priority projects that are listed in the bike and pedestrian plan. So this slide and the next slide are really the first high priority projects listed in this plan. It's a total of $9 million, which is a significant amount of money. And this grant will help us build that gap and connect those dots for us. And so we're excited about this. This is the first step in increasing mobility in the city. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Nick.
Thank you, Ms. Rebecca. For those who don't know me, I'm Nick Barrett. I'm the staff engineer for the city of Natchitoches. And so I want to talk with you about the cost estimate for this project. So as Rebecca mentioned, as a result of the bike and pedestrian plan, we identified a long list of improvements that need to be made. So the next question is, how do we fund this? How do we get the money to do to actually put this into effect? Well, enter the federal RAISE grant, Notice of Funding Opportunity. So that's what we're here for tonight, is get your input on this as we prepare the application to include not only these bicycle improvements and pedestrian improvements, but other things as well. So I don't know if you can see on the slide real well, but basically the main components of our project, first of all, is the construction of those improvements that are outlined in the bicycle and pedestrian plan. Now again, this is for connectivity as well as safety, trying to reduce the crashes that we've had over time. So we've identified about 100 locations for specific improvements, which include things like sidewalk construction, the construction of paved shoulders or widened paved shoulders where we don't have any, crosswalks, and then for bicycles, things like separated bicycle lanes, as well as signing and pavement markings for share the road, where we're not able to actually build separated facilities. So that, what's in the plan, as Rebecca said, and as Mayor Williams said, was a little over $9 million. Now, when I reviewed the cost estimates in the plan, there were some things that we felt like were not adequately addressed in the cost estimates for the plan, and so we added some things like correction for the cost estimates for some of the paved shoulders, additional for embankment and drainage work that has to be done for where we have to do some widening, as well as one of the things in my research I discovered that if we add advanced signing at crosswalks, we can further reduce crash rates by about 25%. So that's another component, and you can see that even that part of it is a little over $500,000, but it would be money well spent in order to reduce those pedestrian crashes. So all of those improvements that are outlined there associated with the bike and pedestrian plan would total about $11.9 million. In addition, we have the construction of the roundabout at Texas Street and Dixie, as Randy talked about, at about a $650,000 cost estimate. Then again, the resurfacing of about 30 streets in the target area for the project would be about $1.8 million. Construction of sidewalks in the project target area that were not included in the bicycle and pedestrian plan, such as on Martin Luther King Drive, Amulet Street, Dixie Street, and Sanford Street, where it turns into Sanford, Lake Street and Powell Street. And those additional sidewalks would add about $2.9 million to the project. Upgrading street lights on Texas Street and Martin Luther King, and also on Amulet Street. And thanks, Matt, for the information that you furnished on that. And that's a little over $600,000. And then for some of these improvements to be constructed, we need to acquire additional right-of-way. And I'm estimating a little over $500,000 of right-of-way expense for that. When you add 10% cost for engineering, both for pre-construction engineering as well as the CE&I during the construction, and then you add about a 3% cost, all of this federal money comes through DOTD to the local entities, and DOTD has their little cost share of that too, to account for their administration of the funds. We get to, as the mayor said, just under $23 million for our project estimate. So, if we are approved for funding under the federal RAISE grant program, when can we expect to see pavement on the ground, right? That's the next big question. And actually, when I first sent this project timeline to the project team, I actually wanted to send them a warning that they need to be sitting down before they read this, because it's longer than we would like to see. But, you know, with federal money comes some, you know, extra requirements on some things. And so it's kind of like whoever controls the purse strings, they control things, and you have to follow their regulations. So for example, once we get approval for the funding, we have to execute a project agreement with the Federal Highway Administration before we can do anything, because any costs that are incurred prior to that agreement being executed are not eligible to receive federal funding. So then you can kind of see, I'm not going to walk through every part of the timeline here, but there's the procurement process to get an engineering design firm on board. I'm estimating the survey, design, and plan development work will take about a year. There's some things that are going on concurrently with that. There's much of the NEPA process, the environmental clearance process, can go on concurrent with the plan development. But I'm estimating about a 9-month time frame for that. And then, of course, there's all the approval processes, because, again, the money's going through the feds and it's going through DOTD. I'm estimating about a year to acquire the rights-of-way that we need. And by the time we get to advertising for bids and receiving bids, I'm estimating about the end of October of 2024. And then by the time we have review of the bids and get the contract signed and executed and do all those things, I'm estimating construction could start in early 2025 and be finished somewhere in early 2027. Well, I know it seems like a long time, but what do they say? Rome wasn't built in a day, right? So that certainly would be the case for this project. But if we can get the funding for this project, I think the wait will be worth it, because there's just so much benefit to this project, and I think it's so vital for this city. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nicole Gray. She's our grants manager for the city of Natchitoches, and also director of community outreach. Nicole?
Thank you very much, Nick. I have to say that obviously this project is very near and dear to my heart, because I grew up in the part of town that is going to be benefiting from a large portion of this project. I grew up in your district, Chris, as you know. And we've come a long way, but we have a long way to go. I really want to say also thank you to Randy and Hannah and Nick and Kevin, who was a part of our discussions. We really mobilized this team very quickly. We knew that we only had a specific amount of time to respond to this project, and I'm really proud of the work that's been done so far. And I also need to mention Randall Smoke, who turned around our designs in 24 hours. So what I want to discuss with you now is how do we get scored for our funding? One of the biggest components of grant submission is obviously putting ourselves in the best position to win. Understand how to properly articulate our value proposition in a way that aligns with the government's objectives sometimes can be difficult. So the Department of Transportation has done a really good job of outlining their criteria for scoring with 5 primary selection criteria and 2 secondary selection criteria. Our goal is to hit on as many of those key points as possible for each of them. The first 5 are safety, environmental sustainability, quality of life, economic competitiveness, state of good repair, and then the secondary selection criteria are partnership and innovation. And I'm going to walk through examples of what each of these mean for the Department of Transportation. When you look at, next slide please. When you look at environmental sustainability, we're starting with safety, sorry about that. When you look at safety, we're thinking of the safe movement of goods and people, the occurrence of crashes and injuries and fatalities, how do we reduce that? Safe highway and road grade crossings, are we dealing with those things in our grant? And are we preventing the release of hazardous materials? So in each of these criteria, as I said, the DOT outlined examples of what they're looking for these. So we're going to attempt, as we're writing our grant narrative, to touch on those things that we can address. The second one is environmental sustainability. The application should demonstrate to the extent possible if the project improves energy efficiency, reduces emissions, avoids or mitigates environmental impacts. Number 2, explicitly considered climate change and environmental justice in the planning and design stage, particularly in communities that disproportionately experience climate change consequences. Number 3, incorporate electrification or zero-emission vehicle infrastructure. So I was pressing the group and saying, well, what if we add an electric charging vehicle location here in Natchitoches? I don't know if there's anybody that lives in Natchitoches that has an electric vehicle, but I thought it was a great idea. And again, we'd love to hear your feedback as we're talking through some of these key points. That's the whole purpose of this public hearing, is to gather your feedback and be able to execute on some of your suggestions once we're finished here today. Results in a modal shift that reduces emissions. Again, think about electric vehicles. And also increases resiliency and disaster preparedness. Obviously, when we have better streets, our fire trucks and our emergency vehicles, our police cars, they can get around better in our neighborhoods and in our main streets. I think this is probably one of the toughest ones that we have, but we are currently looking for ways to think outside of the box. And if you have some input, please share with us. The next one is quality of life. The application should demonstrate to the extent possible, increases transportation choices and equity for individuals, such as providing new or improved walking, biking, and rolling access for the disabled. Our bike and pedestrian plan does an outstanding job of that. Expands access to essential services for communities across the United States, particularly for underserved or disadvantaged communities. Again, we fall right in there with that selection criteria. Improves connectivity to essential services such as jobs and healthcare. Proactively addresses racial equity and barriers to opportunity through the planning process or the design elements. And what this specifically means, obviously, in addition to addressing the fact that this part of the community has been, I don't want to use that word, but needs some attention. But in addition to that, that fact, we can also utilize contractors who might be minority contractors to help align with this selection criteria. And lastly, creates new connections and opportunities in communities that are underserved by transportation. On to economic competitiveness. We're also looking for ways to improve long-term efficiency, reliability, or affordability in the movement of workers and goods. We want to offer significant regional and national improvements in economic strength by increasing the economic productivity of land, capital, and labor, and improving the economic strength of regions and cities. We also want to look at a project that results in long-term job creation and directly results in good-paying jobs through the implementation. For example, the project utilizes union labor or has local hiring provisions. And then lastly, helps the United States compete in a global economy by facilitating efficient and reliable freight movement. Merit criteria number 5, state of good repair. So the application should discuss ways that we can address plans for maintenance of the facilities and system that address current and project vulnerabilities, for example, drainage improvements. So I think that Matt and Nick have been in discussion about what some of those possibilities might be. Threats and consequences if the infrastructure is left unimproved. This is where we talk about what would happen if we continue to allow these streets to deteriorate over time, and what the risk might be. Asset management that optimizes long-term cost structure, and then finally, sustainable revenue for overall life cycle costs. Moving on to the secondary criteria, partnership. Strong collaboration among a broad range of stakeholders in project development and funding, including among neighboring or regional jurisdictions and with the private sector. Equity-focused community outreach and public engagement in the project's planning in underserved communities. That's what we're doing today. And then coordination with economic development, affordable housing projects, water and waste infrastructure, power and electric infrastructure, broadband and land use plans and policies, or other public service efforts. And then finally, innovation is one of the other secondary criteria. But we were looking for opportunities to highlight maybe safety in relation to automated vehicles, including work zone data changes. So I don't know if you've ever been on the freeway and you see that you might see something like work zone ahead or accident ahead. Those are considered work zone data changes, exchanges that help with traffic movement. Technology, including operational performance of transportation systems and broadband deployment. Innovative project delivery, including public-private partnerships and local hiring provisions. Environmental permitting and review to accelerate project delivery and achieve improved outcomes for communities and the environment. And then lastly, funding and finance. What are innovative ways that we're looking at finance, including the use of the private sector or congestion pricing. So the next steps in this process, we are going to take some questions, but I want to let you know what we're looking for in terms of next steps. We're going to schedule a public hearing on June 23rd at 5 p.m. at Ben Johnson Auditorium. So if you know anyone who wasn't able to come today, encourage them to come to our second meeting so that we can hear their feedback as well. The grant submission will be completed by July 10th for a submission. The due date is actually July 12th, but we want to make sure we submit on time and don't encounter any technical glitches or problems that, may arise with maybe thousands of people uploading their grant as well. The award notification, as Nick mentioned earlier in the timeline, will come on November 22nd. And then the funds should be obligated for use by September 30th of 2024. So I want to open up this time now for questions. Does anyone have any questions at this time? No questions? Any comments? Mr. Barnes? Okay.
With the concerned citizen here today, that came out, is there any way possible we can get like a layout of what you just read?
Yes, we're actually going to make this PowerPoint available on the website as well, but I can certainly print out a copy for you to take with you if you'd like. Yes, sir.
And I think it's a good thing that you're bringing to the other part of the community, because oftentimes, people on that side of town don't get a chance to attend these open forums at the council meeting. So this will give them a little knowledge about what's going on with sustainability and street development and grant writing, et cetera. I took notes from both you and Mr. Verrett, so I just wanted to bring that in. Thanks.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Nicole, was I getting this right, that this plan, the funding of this plan was totally contingent on this grant?
Yes,
Okay,
mostly. Randy did mention that we were approved for the bike and pedestrian plan with the state on yesterday. The roundabout, I'm sorry.
roundabout, yes.
My
yes.
mistake, the roundabout.
Oh, okay, so I mean, I just wanted everybody to understand the importance of this grant
Yes,
and this submission on July 10th.
yes,
Without that, most of it don't happen.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions or comments? And to piggyback on what Wayne said, this is a very important grant, and I personally feel very confident about it. I don't want to jinx it, but I think we have a really strong possibility of getting this grant, if not in the first round, in the second round. But I really feel strongly that we have a really good chance. This development is certainly overdue, and we just have to make sure we have the support of the community, and we hope we do. Mayor Williams?
Yeah, thank you all for attending tonight. We have some of you in the room, we've reached out to you for a letter of support, and some of you have gotten those to us already. We really appreciate that. I know others will be communicated with, and we just, you know, if you can help get us that in a very timely manner, that would be, again, most appreciated. So I think that's pretty. I don't know. Did we say a hard date on that? Friday, like tomorrow? I mean, 2 days? Oh, 2 days. 2 days from now. So this coming Friday. Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. Again, thank you all for being here tonight. We have another one coming up on the 25th, 23rd. 23rd. So please help us pass the word. Just in case somebody didn't hear Hannah, and I thank you for bringing it up, Hannah, public comments can be submitted online via the City of Natchitoches website.
Will you also post next meeting date so people can be aware? I think 23rd is Nicole said for Ben Johnson. It's
Yeah,
online.
Hannah, you want to make that tomorrow?
We'll send out a press release on the next public hearing. Yes, ma'am.
We got a net in the back.
Question, are you gonna, will you have it like on Facebook too? I mean, 'cause you know, a lot of people, look at Facebook to.
Yes, so we've been putting our press releases out via Facebook, as well as we can solicit for those public comments via Facebook as well.
Are we live on YouTube or?
We are, and we posted that to our Facebook page
Yeah,
as
so we
well.
are live now as well. And we'll certainly look at it in the comments, anything.
I don't know whether you could answer it, but I do have in my notes, where's Mr. Randy the gas? Is he here? Did he?
No, he's here.
Mr. Randy, could you come up here just for a second, if you don't mind, I have a question for you? If you could answer it, I don't know whether you can. But I'd like to find out, because Ms. Nicole, up at the corner, you hit it a little bit
since it's a DOTD state route, and they made a decision about 5, 6 years ago to remove the light, and Nick was with the department in that time frame, or close to leaving, I would be very doubtful you're going to see the state put another light up. That technology is going by the wayside. That's why the concept of the roundabout moves forward. There's 2 under construction in Pineville right now. You see the big 4-lane one in Leesville. Everywhere you go in the country, this is the concept. And I can recall when they brought a consultant in from Florida, Riyadh Kia, years ago, when they first started talking about it. And he had a video of a large 6-lane in, I can't remember which one of the big Florida cities, and it would show the light changing and the cars building up for 3/4 of a mile. And then it would show them clear, nothing on the street. About 5 years later, here's an identical video after the roundabout, and not one car ever stopped anywhere one time. Just like that. So the concept has been proven all over the world, in Europe long before the Americas. So that's what prompted me to request or comment to the mayor, let's put a roundabout application into capital outlay and pull all the punches we can, try to get that. Even if the RAISE grant didn't get approved, I'm hoping in about 1.5 to 2 years, I can build that roundabout with the RAISE grant or not. And yes, it would take some general fund money from the city if we only get $585,000, but it would still be worth it, because it's still probably one of the worst intersections in the whole town. And we will be acquiring some right-of-way likely, and so it will clean up that entire intersection. Nick, feel free to add to that.
Yeah, the roundabouts accomplish 2 things, really. Number one is alluding to what Randy was talking about. It improves the traffic flow tremendously. It eliminates those times that you have to wait for gaps if you're sitting on Dixie Street, and you're able just to flow into the flow of traffic, especially where you have a situation like on Texas Street. You have about 11,000 vehicles a day. On Dixie Street, based on some traffic counts and some calculations that I did from the traffic counts that were taken manually, in fact, just yesterday by Natchitoches Police Department, it's about 2,700 vehicles a day. So when you have that much of a difference, then you do have to wait for a lot of the, have to wait for gaps. So the roundabout increases the operational efficiency of the intersection. But the second thing it does, it drastically improves safety at those intersections. In where you have intersections such as we have there now, especially unsignalized, well, even with signals, traffic signals, you still have right-angle collisions, and the great majority of right-angle collisions result in fatalities. Roundabouts almost virtually eliminate fatalities and the overall crash rates too. And if you have crashes in roundabouts, it's normally the sideswipe type that you're going to walk away from with just some maybe minor vehicular damage or something. So the roundabout is vastly superior to, of course, the unsignalized intersection, as well as really a traffic signal. The roundabouts have been proven all over the place to be better for both those standpoints.
Well, I want you to know that by letter, we have contacted you by letter,
Yes, ma'am.
from the council seat and citizen participation.
Yes, ma'am.
So they have poo-pooed that.
Yes, ma'am. What was happening at the time that was taken out, and again, that wasn't my direct decision to remove the signal, but it was part of DOTD's overall efforts statewide to reduce the number of signalized intersections because of the potential, really, there's more potential for a right-angle collision with a signal, believe it or not, than without the signal. And so it was part of a statewide effort, and when they analyzed the crash data, the signal was not warranted anymore, and that's why it was removed. But hopefully we'll get the roundabout one way or the other here, and we'll have a much better situation. Thank you.
Nick, while you're up there, let me just
Yes, ma'am.
expound on this. I know we're talking about the roundabout, but also I wanted to know if there's anything, we are building up over on east side town.
Uh-huh.
Is there any way traffic light or something can
Yes, ma'am. That would be a question really for DOTD, because Kaiser Avenue is a state route. That's something we can ask about. Again, the general trend is not to add signalized intersections, but to try to get away from those. But we can certainly, I can certainly make some contacts with them and explore that possibility.
Would you do that, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Rather than just asking about that.
Sure.
That's very unsafe. Thank
Okay,
you.
will do. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, department heads, for being here tonight. Thank you, council. We have 4 of the 5 council members here. Thanks to everybody who presented. And we have another one coming up on the 23rd. Have a good night.